Hi automotive enthusiasts, welcome to Cam and Crank. Today we're diving into a machine that didn't just redefine speed, style, and performance, but changed the entire idea of what a car could be, the Lamborghini Miura. This is the car often called the first true supercar, the one that took everything the industry thought it knew about road-going performance and turned it on its head. Back in the mid-1960s, Lamborghini wasn't supposed to build this kind of car at all. Ferruccio Lamborghini, the company's founder, believed in building refined grand tours, fast, luxurious, but comfortable cars that could take you across Europe without the harshness of a racing machine. Yet, out of the shadows of his factory came an idea that broke every expectation, one that would send ripples through the entire automotive world. The Miura wasn't born from a boardroom or a top-down corporate plan. It was the passion project of a small group of young engineers working after hours, experimenting with a radical chassis that borrowed from racing tradition. When it finally emerged in public, it was so daring that it made everything else on the road look suddenly old-fashioned. What followed was not just a new model, but the birth of an entirely new category of automobile, one that combined beauty, danger, and sheer impossibility in a way no car had before. In this video, we're going to explore how the Miura came to be, why it struck such a nerve in its own time, and how it cemented a legacy that still shapes the supercars we know today. Along the way, we'll uncover the rebellion behind its creation, the engineering gambles that made it work, and sometimes made it terrifying, and the cultural wave it unleashed, where cars stopped being just transportation and became rolling symbols of status, freedom, and excess. So settle in, because this isn't just the story of a car. This is the story of how a bold experiment from a young brand forced an entire industry to catch up, and in the process, rewrote the rulebook of speed and desire. By the end, you'll see why the Lamborghini Miura isn't just remembered as a classic, it's remembered as the car that changed everything. The story of the Miura begins with a contradiction that makes it irresistible. Lamborghini was never supposed to chase racing glory, yet the Miura was engineered like a race car for the road. That tension is what makes this car so fascinating. It came from a company that wanted to distance itself from Ferrari's single-minded focus on motorsport, but a group of rebellious engineers at Sant'Agata couldn't resist dreaming bigger. Micro-story. Inside Lamborghini's factory in the early 1960s, a trio of young talents, Gianpaolo Dallara, Paolo Stenzani, and Bob Wallace, decided to push boundaries. They sketched out a chassis with the engine placed transversely behind the driver, just like top-level racing prototypes. This wasn't sanctioned by Ferruccio Lamborghini, but their youthful energy drove them forward anyway. They built it after hours, sneaking time and resources, fueled by nothing more than belief in the concept. That quiet rebellion planted the seed of the Miura. Context Digest. At the time, placing the engine behind the driver was considered extreme, suitable for Formula One or Le Mans, but not for something you could drive on the road. Most high-performance cars kept the engine in front, delivering stability and familiarity. Moving it to the middle changed weight distribution, cornering dynamics and aerodynamics, but also introduced unpredictability and risk. For a road car, it was uncharted territory, reflection bridge, and yet, the thrill of doing something no one else dared was exactly what made it irresistible to its creators. Micro-story. In 1965, Lamborghini quietly displayed the bare chassis at the Turin Auto Show. Visitors were astonished by the radical design, but without a finished body, most didn't know what to make of it. Journalists and rival engineers, however, immediately understood that something groundbreaking was in the works. It was a gamble, showing the skeleton of a car without Ferruccio's blessing, but it generated intrigue that pushed the project forward. The public reaction confirmed that the world was ready for something outrageous. Context Digest. Around this time, Ferrari dominated the imagination of performance enthusiasts. Their cars were built on racing pedigree, with victories that turned into marketing gold. Lamborghini, on the other hand, was a newcomer with no motorsport credentials, aiming for refinement instead of trophies. By daring to step into Ferrari's lane with the Miura, Lamborghini risked being dismissed or ridiculed, but also stood to make history if it succeeded. Reflection bridge. That risk was exactly what gave the Miura its edge. It was bold enough to threaten the established order. Micro-story. Enter Marcello Gandini, the young designer at Bertone who was given the task of clothing the radical chassis. His creation was nothing short of breathtaking. The Miura's low-slung shape, Flowing curves and hidden headlights looked like nothing else on the road. It was seductive and futuristic, more like a spaceship than a car. Gandini's bodywork transformed a daring engineering experiment into rolling art, ensuring that the Miura would be remembered not only for how it drove, but for how it made people feel just standing near it. Context digest. The combination of engineering innovation and artistic beauty mattered because the 1960s were a decade of transformation. Culture was shifting toward youth, rebellion, and breaking tradition in music, fashion, and art. The Miura wasn't just a car, it was a perfect mirror of its time. It embodied the thrill of pushing limits and the glamour of living dangerously, a machine that seemed designed for the rock stars and playboys who defined the era. Micro story. When the completed Miura debuted at the 1966 Geneva Motor Show, the crowd reaction was electric. Attendees swarmed the car, ignoring everything else on display. Ferrari's booth, usually the center of attention, looked like yesterday's news. Overnight, Lamborghini had stolen the spotlight, announcing itself not just as a competitor, but as a brand rewriting the rules. The Miura was more than an exhibit. It was a declaration that the future had arrived, and it wore a raging bull badge. Context digest. That unveiling mattered because Geneva was no ordinary auto show. It was where Europe's elite automakers displayed their most important creations, where reputations could be made or destroyed in a single week. For Lamborghini, a company less than 5 years old, to outshine Ferrari and Maserati was a seismic moment. It showed that daring design and radical engineering could beat tradition and heritage in a single stroke. Micro story. As journalists lined up to drive the Miura, they discovered not just beauty, but performance that matched its appearance. With its V12 engine mounted midship, it could reach speeds over 170 miles per hour, staggering for the time. The handling was razor sharp, sometimes too sharp, demanding respect from even the most experienced drivers. It was intoxicating, exhilarating, and terrifying in equal measure. This wasn't just another fast car, it was something altogether new. Reflection bridge. And that newness raised the stakes, because suddenly, every rival brand had to respond, and every enthusiast had to rethink what a road car could be. The Miura wasn't simply an audacious concept anymore. It was real, it was breathtaking, and it had just turned Lamborghini from a boutique newcomer into the most talked about name in performance. The world would never look at sports cars the same way again, and the story was only getting more intense as success brought new challenges and contradictions that shaped the Miura's legacy. With the Miura now established as the world's most sensational car, the next chapter of its story unfolded in the glare of global attention. Lamborghini had gone from outsider to headline maker, and with that fame came pressure. Expectations grew, rivals began plotting responses, and the Miura itself had to prove it was more than a dazzling showpiece. Micro story. One of the defining aspects of the Miura was its engine, a 3.9-liter V12 mounted sideways behind the seats. This unusual transverse layout saved space and created that impossibly low silhouette. But it also introduced challenges like heat buildup and tricky weight distribution. Early owners discovered that long, fast drives could cause alarming cockpit warmth and high-speed instability. Far from discouraging buyers, though, these quirks gave the Miura an aura of danger. The sense that you were taming a wild beast rather than driving a polished machine. Context digest. Cars in the late 1960s were not defined by safety regulations or electronic aids the way they are today. The Miura existed in a world before widespread crash testing, before stability control, before airbags. To drive one was to accept risk, and in a strange way, that was part of the appeal. It gave the Miura its edge, separating the bold from the timid. Reflection bridge. That razor's edge quality would shape both its reputation and its legend, as glamorous figures flocked to it knowing it was as treacherous as it was beautiful. Micro story. Among those glamorous figures were rock stars, actors, and royalty. Frank Sinatra, Miles Davis, and the Shah of Iran were all linked to the Miura, and photographs of celebrities stepping out of the car elevated it beyond the automotive world into pop culture. It became a status symbol of the highest order, the kind of car you didn't just drive, you made an entrance with it. Owning a Miura meant declaring that you were part of a select club of the bold, the wealthy, and the trend-setting. Context digest. The 1960s were an age of expanding mass media, with magazines and television making style icons out of musicians and actors. When those same icons drove Miuras, the car itself became shorthand for the new global elite. Unlike Ferraris, which were tied tightly to racing, the Miura seemed like a car for the jet set, a road-going expression of a lifestyle that was equal parts indulgence and rebellion. Reflection bridge. That cultural positioning gave the Miura more than performance credibility. It gave it mythic resonance, making it bigger than any one driver or even the company that built it. Micro story. Lamborghini, recognizing the spotlight, rolled out refinements. The Miura S brought more power and improved trim, while the Miura SV, introduced in 1971, became the ultimate evolution, with flared fenders, wider tires, and a reputation as the most balanced of the series. Each version addressed flaws while amplifying appeal, ensuring that the Miura's place at the top of the food chain lasted into the early 1970s. Yet even with improvements, the Miura remained demanding, and that was part of the magic. Context digest. At the same time, rivals were preparing their answers. Ferrari would eventually respond with the Berlinetta Boxer, while De Tomaso, Maserati, and ISO tried their hands at mid-engine exotics. The Miura had shifted the entire competitive landscape. Suddenly, no serious performance brand could ignore the mid-engine configuration. The stakes were higher than ever, and Lamborghini was setting the pace. Micro story. Behind the scenes, however, Lamborghini itself was facing tension. Ferruccio Lamborghini remained uninterested in racing and cautious about overextending the company. The Miura was a success story that drew global headlines, but it was also expensive to build and maintain, and it pulled the brand into territory Ferruccio hadn't originally intended. This created a paradox. The car that made Lamborghini famous was also a car its founder was ambivalent about. Context digest. That paradox highlights a deeper truth about the Miura. It wasn't just a corporate product. It was the vision of a few passionate individuals whose ideas happened to align perfectly with the cultural moment. Without them, the Miura might never have existed. It was both a company car and a rebel creation, and that duality gave it a soul that corporate planning alone could never replicate. Micro story. By the early 1970s, the Miura's reign began to fade. Faster and more advanced cars were emerging, and Lamborghini itself was preparing the even more radical Countach. Yet by then, the Miura had already secured its place in history. It had transformed Lamborghini from a newcomer into a symbol, and it had transformed the sports car into something new, the supercar. Even as production wound down, the legend only grew. Because the Miura was more than the sum of its parts, it was an event on wheels, reflection bridge. That legend was about to evolve even further, because the Miura's true impact would only become clear in the decades after it left production, when the entire industry revealed just how deeply it had been influenced by this bold, dangerous, and beautiful creation. What began as a rebellious experiment had now become a fully realized cultural icon, and its influence was about to echo through generations of design and performance that followed. As the Miura transitioned from contemporary marvel to historical icon, its influence only deepened. What had once been a daring experiment by a handful of engineers now stood as the foundation of an entire genre of automobile. The supercar as we know it today, the wedge-shaped dream machine that blends artistry with extreme speed, owes its very definition to the Miura. Micro story. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Lamborghini itself doubled down on the idea of the supercar with the Countach, a car that exaggerated every aspect of the Miura's formula. The Countach may have been sharper, more radical, and poster-ready, but it was building on a road already paved by the Miura. Other brands followed suit. From Ferrari's Berlinetta Boxer and later the F40, to Porsche's 959, all chasing the balance of beauty and menace that the Miura had shown was possible on public roads. Context digest. By proving that exotic engineering and provocative styling could capture not just enthusiasts, but also global headlines, the Miura created a new market segment. Suddenly, owning such a car wasn't just about driving fast, it was about identity, aspiration, and cultural capital. The idea that a car could be a symbol as powerful as a fashion label or a private jet began with this Lamborghini. Reflection bridge. And because the Miura had rewritten expectations, Future automakers no longer aimed merely to build sports cars. They aimed to build icons. Microstory. As time passed, collectors began to see the Miura as more than just a fast car. Its value steadily climbed, and by the early 2000s, it had entered the realm of seven-figure auctions. Restorations became meticulous, with specialists in Italy and beyond working to preserve every curve of Gandini's bodywork and every note of the screaming V12. The Miura had crossed into legend, where each surviving example carried not only monetary value, but also the weight of history. To own one wasn't just a privilege, it was to hold a piece of the origin story of supercars themselves. Context digest. Collectability often depends on rarity, beauty, and historical significance. The Miura had all three in spades, with fewer than 770 built across all versions, styling that remained unmatched in its elegance, and the distinction of being the first road car of its type. These factors combined to ensure that the Miura would never be forgotten, cementing its status as both an artifact and a living symbol. Microstory. The cultural references also never stopped. From film appearances that immortalized its shape, to music videos and fashion shoots that borrowed its aura, the Miura continued to inspire artists and creators long after it left production. Even Lamborghini itself revisited the icon with modern tributes, including the Miura homage edition of the Aventador, reminding the world that the company's future remained tied to its greatest past achievement. Context digest. Modern supercars, no matter how advanced, continue to echo the Miura's DNA. The mid-engine layout is now standard for performance flagships. Sleek proportions, dramatic styling, and the blend of art and danger trace directly back to Gandini's lines and Dallara's chassis. Every time a new model arrives with claims of being the fastest or the most beautiful, it is unconsciously measured against the Miura's standard. Reflection bridge. And that unbroken thread shows that the Miura was not just a product of its era, but a blueprint for everything that came after. Microstory. Today, when enthusiasts gather at concours events or cars and coffee shows, a Miura draws a crowd unlike almost anything else. Younger fans who never saw it new still respond viscerally to its presence. The car's shape seems to freeze time, capturing the essence of the 1960s while still looking futuristic. That timelessness is rare in design, and it explains why the Miura remains one of the most admired and lusted after cars ever built. The aura around it is not nostalgia, it's reverence. Context digest. That reverence carries lessons beyond Lamborghini. It shows how innovation often comes from daring individuals willing to bend rules, how culture and technology intertwine, and how beauty can be as disruptive as raw power. The Miura reminds us that machines are not just mechanical. They are cultural artifacts that tell us who we were, who we are, and who we want to be. Microstory. Even now, decades after its last example left the factory, the Miura remains a star in museums, private collections, and stories told by enthusiasts. Its roar, its curves, and its rebellious spirit continue to inspire designers and dreamers. It is more than metal and rubber. It is a reminder that one car, born from youthful defiance, can tilt the axis of an entire industry. And when we trace the lineage of every supercar on today's roads, from electric hypercars to hybrid monsters, it all circles back to that single audacious decision to put a V12 behind the driver in 1966. Reflection bridge. The Miura's story closes not as a relic of the past, but as the heartbeat of a movement still alive in every bold new machine that chases the edge of possibility. Its journey proves that sometimes, the most disruptive innovations come from those willing to build against the odds. And that is why the Miura will forever be remembered, not just as Lamborghini's crown jewel, but as the supercar that changed everything. Looking back across the arc of the Miura's story, what becomes clear is that this car was never just about horsepower or speed. It was about daring to do something no one else believed was possible, and in doing so, it reset the expectations of an entire industry. From the moment those young engineers sketched their rebellious chassis, through Gandini's breathtaking design, to its glamorous rise in the 1960s spotlight, the Miura was always more than a machine. It was an attitude, a cultural statement, and a declaration that the automobile could be as much about emotion as mechanics. The Miura's triumph lies not in flawless engineering, but in how it embraced imperfection. It was temperamental, unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, but those qualities became part of its allure. It embodied the idea that true greatness often comes with risk. To drive one wasn't simply to travel quickly. It was to engage with a piece of rolling art that asked as much of its driver as it gave back in exhilaration. And its legacy? Every modern supercar, from the Countach that followed it to today's cutting-edge hypercars, lives in the Miura's shadow. The mid-engine layout is now the default for performance. The idea of a car as a cultural icon is taken for granted, and the merging of beauty with menace is industry standard. None of that existed before the Miura. Without it, the map of automotive history would look entirely different. But perhaps the most enduring truth about the Miura is how it still resonates with people. You don't need to be a collector or a driver who's ever sat behind its wheel to feel its impact. Just seeing one, its flowing curves, its impossibly low stance, reminds us that human creativity can take something functional and elevate it into the realm of the unforgettable. It bridges generations, connecting those who remember its debut to those discovering it for the first time online or at a car show today. So when we call the Miura the first supercar, we're not just giving it a title. We're acknowledging the spark it lit that continues to burn in every ambitious performance machine that follows. It showed us that cars could be more than machines. They could be myths in motion. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.